Call the meeting to order. First item is roll call, please.
Bano,
Here.
Meyer,
Here.
Molzon,
Here.
Holda,
Here.
Schnelly,
Here.
Nelson. Here. Van Campen.
Here.
And Smithback is out tonight.
Thank you. Next item is approval of minutes of March 5th, 2026. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second. We have a motion of a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We're going to move on to item 6A. Since we have no, what? No. Okay. Because I don't think, no, I'm sorry, but no. I'm being questioned why I didn't do item 4. Okay, fine, you people, I'll do it.
I just signed my paper with Joy. Is
Oh,
that
you
okay?
did? Okay, well, this agenda item allows the commission to receive information and to ask questions of a presenter to facilitate a better understanding of the information. Commission members may discuss procedural matters related to the information, such as whether the information should be directed to staff or placed on a future commission agenda. However, commission members may not expand their discussion beyond such protocol matters, procedural members, excuse me. Otherwise, the agenda will proceed as posted. For the remainder of the agenda items, the Plan Commission will not invite public comment. Anybody want to speak to anything that's not on the agenda? No. You do?
Yes, I'm
Then
on
you are
the
up, and I
agenda
apologize.
for 6A, right? I think I got
Well,
that
no,
right.
that's 6A, yeah, but this was 4A.
You can
Oh,
just
for-
speak on whatever you'd like,
Oh,
so.
I can just talk about anything?
Well,
You can, actually.
Only for 3 minutes.
3 minutes, that's all you're gonna get.
Okay, well timed.
But as long as you want to talk about 6, yeah, we go with 6A.
Yes.
That's what we're gonna do.
Ann Michaels, 630 Southwoods Edge Drive, representing SELF and housing advocacy with Green Pastures Living, and just wanted to thank you for, the work that has been done for rewriting, just providing people more opportunities for housing with some of the rewrites, and just wanted to review and remind of some of the things that have been worked on. And just considering some of the AARP best practices and things that we talk about in the advocacy group that I belong to, Madison Town Makers. And, just grateful that in some of the wording we've opened up, increasing the square footage and the no parking and no impact is really giving people more options. And I know there's people waiting for this to be approved, and Elise probably has a list, but just grateful for that. But I know that tonight you're also considering some things that I think just reminding you that the purpose is to open up that accessibility and affordability, And I know sometimes we can be focused more on other things. And the two things I just wanted to highlight was, first, the issue of matching the principal structure. And, just really seeing and considering the importance versus the cost of it. Because I just wanted to reiterate Heidi coming on in February, and she has a yellow brick house, but her garage that she would like to be as accessory dwelling is beige vinyl. So if that was needing to be matching principal structure, that would be cost prohibitive. So that's just an example, and how important it is to match it. And yet I think there's also things to consider with the attorney of like, what is it subjective? So just things to consider, just weighing, just iterating the importance of why we are rewriting this is to making more options and to increase the affordability and accessibility as well as the future of this, and that goes to my point of the owner occupancy. I'm not saying whether you should, include it or not, but also to consider, AARP makes the point of like sometimes people trying to get financing for this makes it very hard if it has to be ownership. And also the long-term effects of having very stringent requirements of owner occupancy. So just things to consider. That's kind of what I wanted for the public comment of just keeping the importance of having that affordable and accessible options to people in front of mind when you are making these rewrites, as well as the legal prospect of it. But that's all I had to say. I'm just excited for the people that I can help through this new zoning rewrite. So just thank you for all that you do.
Thank you. Nice. Okay, you want to lead us through this, Elise?
Sure. Okay. So we're on 6A now. Continued conversation on our ADU zoning text amendment that we're working on. There were some of the comments from last month incorporated, and just on that point that was brought up about matching structure. I think last time we just talked about maybe consistent with neighborhood design or something like that. So I'll make sure that wording is a little bit more clear. But in short, I think the issues that we sort of still have on the table to discuss, and it seemed like there was some, there was different perspectives on this within the Planning Commission last month, was owner occupancy and sort of what can be legally controlled and what do we want to kind of get into, and then short-term rentals versus long-term rentals, and overall just sort of the possibility that a single-family, structure with an ADU on the lot, if both could be rented, that could essentially make a duplex situation. And are we okay with that? And again, to what scale do we think this is going to be within the village? Built out in the short term, long term. Is this going to be a trend that we continue to see? So we've been doing a lot of back and forth with Larry Konopecki, our village attorney. I'm not sure if all of you have had a chance to meet him yet. But I figured we could just cut out the middleman, which is me, and maybe have a chance for Larry to go through. He's had a lot of experience working in other communities on these issues. So I thought it'd be helpful for you to hear directly from him, and then, ask any questions you have, and hopefully we can try to find a common direction here so we can move towards the public hearing and getting some of this text actually written into an ordinance.
Okay.
Yeah, so on the owner occupied question, there's always been a general rule in under Wisconsin law through court decisions that if you own property in a residential district, you have a right to rent that out for at least 30 days or longer. That was codified in statutes, I say recently, but within the last 10 years, maybe 15 now. And in a statute that relates to short-term rentals, that statute also captures long-term rentals. And so there haven't been any cases that have interpreted the long-term rental component of that statute, which is what we potentially be talking about here. But my interpretation of it is that it disallows, it at least arguably disallows a restriction on rental based on requiring someone to live in either the house next to it or in it. And so, one of the things that we've struggled with in this project is that there are other communities that do have that kind of a restriction. And so, there's quite a few out there, actually, I think that Sonia found that do impose that restriction. I think it's somewhat questionable as to whether that could be enforced. And so your options are to do it and wait to see as the law evolves and find out. But my caution to you would be, since there's at least some uncertainty as to whether that kind of a restriction would be enforceable, that I think you make your decisions about what to do with ADUs, not expecting, if you decide to impose that kind of a restriction, not expecting or doing it only because that restriction was in place. So if you're not comfortable with rental of either or both of the units on the property, putting into the ordinance a restriction like this is not something you should necessarily rely on in terms of your decision-making about whether to do it at all. I suspect it would probably more likely than not that it would be impermissible to impose that kind of a restriction. Admittedly, there is some gray area there. So just don't make that decision based on that.
Another way that you kind of described it to me earlier is, obviously right now we have all of our residential districts. This would be permitted by right. I think one way you kind of put it is wherever you're uncomfortable having a potential duplex situation, maybe don't allow these. So just know that that is likely a possibility that at some point in time could fluctuate, but both of these units could be rented given all these other, the right to rent and other precedents in the law right now. So if we're okay with that situation in, single family neighborhoods and things, then we could continue to have it written as permissible in all those SR districts. But if you felt that was inappropriate there, then that would be one area maybe we could take a look at and only allow it in two family. But I think, again, back to the intent, my understanding was we want to create, gentle density within our neighborhoods. This is an opportunity to add housing stock without really changing the character or look of the neighborhood to a large degree. And again, we've even seen in cities as large as Madison, this is not being, it's still very cost prohibitive, like I have kept saying every month. So small numbers, or if these are getting built, technology may improve and construction materials, and maybe they're prefab structures that become more affordable. But that's just kind of what we're seeing in other communities. It's still pretty low scale. So just sort of weighing how much do you want to get into the weeds and really restrict these. But, we don't have these yet. So now's the opportunity to try to get ahead of some of the concerns we have. It's obviously harder once you have properties that are existing, and some are grandfathered and then some are operating under a new set of rules as well.
Okay.
Was there anything about anything else about short-term rentals and?
Yeah, if we want to get into that, while I'm here, I guess that's, we've had, Lisa and I have had a number of conversations about whether the village should engage in a discussion about regulating short-term rentals. And the answer we usually get is, we don't really see a lot of that here, and it's not rising to the level of, police calls or complaints at this point, whether they're happening or not. I will tell you that if you wait until those things happen and then try to create an ordinance, it's much, much more difficult when there's people who are vested in it and maybe there's even some emotion involved. If it isn't happening yet, it will. That's certainly the trend. It's not to say that they're bad. I stay in them. I think probably most of us have at least done that. It's not a question whether they're good or bad. It's a question of whether you feel like they should be regulated, and if so, how. One of the challenges that I see is that once there's a problem, you as a plan commission, your recommendations to the village board, and then the village board in their legislative decision on the ordinance will really be pushed hard to put a very restrictive ordinance in place that will likely have impermissible components to it. And it's very hard to withstand that pressure when you get into that situation where there's some people who are pretty fired up about it. And so if you're going to do it, the best time to do it is when you don't have a problem. And then you can just have sort of a rational, less emotional at least, discussion about what an appropriate level of regulation is. And so, you know, it's always my recommendation to do it, because it'll eventually be something that will come before you and the village board as a problem. When, you can't say, but there will be disagreement amongst people as to how to handle that. And that's very much tied with, the reason we're bringing it up today is because it's really tied to this, not directly, but, you know, like Elise said, it's not inexpensive to have, to build a second dwelling unit on your property, and if you're doing that, the example we talked about today is, you know, if you're doing it for your parents or one of your parents, and they spend 3 months in Florida, Arizona, there's gonna be a strong incentive to rent that short term to cover those costs, right? If some people will, some people won't. And we don't expect these to pop up all over the village, but it is going to be a trend. It's probably won't be accelerated all that much by this ADU decisions, this ADU ordinance, but it will be in front of you. It's just, without question, it's the trend.
Any questions, you guys? Patrick, before you had some discussion, last meetings or something, didn't you?
No, I wasn't at the last
Oh, I'm sorry.
meeting, so.
Maybe before.
No, I guess the only thing I had highlighted on kind of dealing with owner occupancy is it's stated in here for a period of at least 10 months, which I don't understand why it's limited at 10 months.
And I think that, if you don't mind if I jump in?
Yep.
I think that sort of underscores also one of the challenges of imposing a residency requirement. What does residency mean? You have to define it as something. You know, you could say, you know, where you're registered to vote. Well, not everybody's registered to vote. How long, how many days a year? You know, some of the ordinances on short-term rentals that have now been invalidated in the courts would say, you know, that had to be where you slept for 180 days a year, or you have to, if you're gonna say, if you're gonna have a residency requirement, you gotta be real clear about what residency means. So it's not necessarily that there's any magic to 10 months,
Well, that's why I questioned it, because typically state residency is 6 months and 1 day, right?
Or for voting, it's 30, what is that, it's even shorter, right?
30 days.
Okay.
Yeah, and currently we have the recommendation that we would not have any occupancy restrictions. I think that what's in italics there with the 10 months was just kind of throwing a bone at if this was something that we wanted to pursue. The language was language that Larry had suggested a couple months ago, that we could build something similar to that and have, have a restrictive agreement between the property owner and the city or the village, and it's recorded. And but again, hard to enforce, gets complicated.
Yeah, and
Track it
the
down.
italics, italicized provision in your report, that would probably be the closest we feel like we could get to imposing a residency requirement, because you, as Elise just mentioned, you know, you'd almost have to create some sort of agreement between the property owner and the village, because again, from a regulatory perspective, like how we regulate everybody's use without agreement, it's questionable as to whether the village has the authority to do that. So that's sort of a way you bootstrap into it if you really wanted to go that route. I wanted to say one more thing about enforceability. It's probably not, again, arbitrary, 10 months, whatever, you gotta pick something, but then how do you enforce it moving forward, right? We don't all, I mean, other than potentially with voting, we don't all report back to our community how many days we lived in what house, and so it's challenging in that respect too. I think what ends up happening in the communities that have this kind of a restriction is they look for the obvious examples of somebody's not living there, they're getting the mail somewhere else, they haven't been seen, they're, you can see that they're renting out both houses on VRBO every day. So there's some obvious ways you could enforce something like that, but when it gets down to the close calls, there's just no way you would be able to determine whether someone was living there or not.
I guess I don't remember removing the requirement for primary and secondary residence of ownership being on the property. I don't remember having that discussion. As a matter of fact, I feel pretty strongly about having ownership on the property, primary residence. The reason is this is a desirable place to move in the country. This is a place that is become marketable, and you see it year after year with growth of the areas in and around Madison. It is also a target for business to come in and buy properties and turn those properties into a full rental situation. So if you do that, you remove the ability to have this ADU, and it becomes purely a profit source for a business. Something that we don't want to have in this situation. That's not what we're trying to set this up for. I have seen it personally in that the places that you talk about, Airbnbs, whatever, companies come in and they slowly buy up these homes, and then they change the HOAs to their favor, where you don't have the ability to have a primary residence, and then they control the HOA, they control a subdivision, and then they can really start to change a community's situation. I think that's not what we want to have happen. So I think we need to find some tooth to it. I don't know what that is. That's not my voodoo. I also think that I can speak from experience in the communities that my children live that are desirable places for people to move, that they are seeing businesses come in and buying large tracts of homes, subdivisions, and developing them purely as rental homes. And it changes the complexity and nature of an area. Again, something that we're not wanting to do with this simple ADU. I think this is intended to be an affordable, for simplicity's sake, mother-in-law's house kind of thing. And I think that's the right thing to do. So I think we need to find a way to make that work, and we need to set that up on the front side.
And I'll give you a very direct answer to that. Two things. Given that perspective, to give effect to that perspective, you need to have a short-term rental ordinance in this village. So that's, if there's enough people that feel that way on this body and on the village board, that's step one. And then on the definitive answer, on ADUs, I don't believe that there's a way that you could put the teeth in the early stages like we're doing right now, where I would have confidence that it would stay that way. So we can say whatever we want in an ordinance, but I don't have, and I've told Elise this, I don't have confidence that if we put provisions in the ordinance that impose the teeth that that maybe you would all like to see, that those will last. Whether that be through challenges directly to the village's ordinance, or as this works its way through other communities and other court cases. I suspect, and I've talked to quite a few other people who are practitioners in this area in preparation for this meeting, and everyone agreed that we're not sure that you shouldn't make a decision to allow a second dwelling unit if the reason you're doing it is because you're confident that you could keep people from renting those to someone else. If that's an important enough piece, then you shouldn't do it, because I don't think that those teeth will last. I think they'll be invalidated over time.
All right, so I'm a little bit confused, but so you're saying that the owner occupied requirement may be challenged somewhere along the line.
I think that those requirements there's a lot of communities that haven't caught up with the state law that I was just talking about. That's, that state law hasn't been tested as far as I know. In this context, it's been tested with short-term rentals, and it's been, owner occupancy has been invalidated for short-term rentals. So we have that data point on short-term rentals, but it's the same statute that codified the historical common law of the right to rent for longer term, and it uses the same words that were the basis for the court to invalidate a residency requirement for short-term rentals. So I think it's pretty likely that it's unenforceable. That question hasn't been answered, but fortunately, you're at a point in time where you can make a decision about whether to do this at all. I just have to tell you that if the only reason, again, I know I've said it before, if the only reason you're doing it is because you feel confident that you can keep it from being rented, just know that you shouldn't have that confidence.
And I guess I don't have the same concerns, John, and I haven't lived other places. I haven't seen other people come in and buy homes and do things that you clearly have seen. But to me, I don't know that having that owner occupancy is necessarily a requirement that I would feel needs to be in there personally. I mean, I see kids that live together all over the place, right? They're college buddies. One of them now lives in that house, and then their other buddy lives in the other house, right? They're not related. Maybe it's a parent's house, they're both living there. Like, I see other ways that these could be used, right? And I feel like it might reduce the people that really want to build these, that live there, that want their mother-in-law. I just worry that if we put too many barriers there, we are creating kind of a code just to be able to have a code, I guess, personally. But I get what you're saying, John. I just don't know that I think it would be as important as you guys do.
Well, in reality, you were looking at this to a certain extent as grandiose. We're going to have all this massive development, and we're not. The reality is we're not. So this is going to be pretty minimal, I think. I could be wrong. I mean, I can't imagine building another building in my backyard. And Bergamot sure as heck's not going to allow it. So
Where there's an HOA, to John's point, where there's an HOA, they make their own rules.
yeah, well, true.
But effectively, we're making every lot in these districts where this is allowed, we're making that a potential duplex lot. So, Patrick lives between me and John and decides to chew up his whole backyard and put an ADU in there that we don't find attractive. We're now sitting on our decks looking at it and potentially dealing with, more residents and more problems and more cars parked in front of our mailboxes because there's no parking requirement. So, there are potential problems with it, and, it looks good from the 10,000 foot view, but, individual cases, it'll be problematic. In other cases, it'll be quaint and hardly noticeable, but the less scrutiny and regulation we put on it, the more potential there is for problems with it. And, the people that aren't gonna be happy are the surrounding couple of neighbors that bought their house with what they thought was their view, and now it's changed dramatically.
I've always tried to look at my position here on the Plan Commission from the perspective of the village in the long term, playing the what if game. And yeah, I mean, if we take a micro picture of this, is it a big issue? No. Could it be? Hell yeah. So that's the what if game that I'm playing, is I don't want that what if game to happen. So how do we sort of get that taken care of on the front side? And I don't think anybody here on the surface would say that ADUs are a bad thing. I don't think anybody would. I don't think anybody would say, if you just polled us right now, are ADUs a bad thing? Nobody would say no. It's the details that we're just getting hung up on. And again, my personal experience, I've seen it. I've seen it. and I don't want that to happen here. And it seems like it's a pretty easy thing to do with a short-term rental ordinance, correct? Which would fall back into sort of
Yeah.
Phil's court.
Yeah, it's just a matter of having it prepared. I would make a couple of comments, pardon me, Larry. To your comment, John, about, you know, owner occupied or short-term rentals, and I certainly appreciate your concern about private equity coming in, buying up these neighborhoods, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the other side of that is those same firms are the ones that are most likely going to challenge our ordinance because they have the money to do so. And I don't know if you would agree with that, or.
Yeah, and there's, I mean, I work in places where exactly what John said is happening all the time. You know, any community in the four corners of counties around the Dells. I work for Minocqua, I mean, this is, what you've described is, it's not rumors, it's absolutely true. It's just not happening here yet. And so the question is, how do you, I don't think that there's much you can do about that other than the short-term rental. And of course, what that means is less than 29 days, less than 30 days, more than 6. Okay, so less than a month, let's call it. You have some room to regulate there. That's what a short-term rental ordinance is. The statutes allow the opportunity to do that. And you can require them, for instance, to only do that half a year, right? But what we're talking about here in terms of owner occupancy is not just short-term rentals, which an ordinance on that would help, but also long-term rentals. So if mom passes or mother-in-law passes or moves, and you could have a full-time year-round renter in that. And I think that what's been discussed is that as long as the owner of the lot occupies one, right, is that kind of where occupies the primary dwelling, then that's okay, and they have to be next to it, and they have to live with in the italics in the report, the idea was brought up, well, maybe we could do some sort of a deed restriction where if someone wants to build one of these, they have to agree that the owner has to reside in one or the other, or however you decided to do it, one or the other or the primary. Again, that gets into how do you enforce that, how do you measure it? But if you could do it, I think the concerns John raises would be mitigated by doing that. I mean, it's not a bad idea to solve those issues. It's just that I don't know that you could ever enforce it. And in my experience, the private equity firms that are buying up all the houses, they're not just looking for ones with 2 units. They're buying up single-family home.
Single-family.
Yeah, but maybe something like this would be more attractive because it's 2 rentals. I don't know, but yeah. You're kind of stuck in a tough spot.
And to your point, Larry, I agree. You know, in my world, if you've got a 2-tenant building and you put a wall between the two, if a thief wants to get through it, he's going to find a way. But what you're trying to do is stop the honest thief. They see the wall, they stop. It's the same kind of thing for this. If somebody sees an ordinance and all of a sudden they go, I guess I just really don't want to fight that. You know, if they've got deep pockets, yeah, they're going to go. But I think you're trying to you're just trying to slow it, is what you're trying to do.
I would agree with that 100%. And I'm not saying that this would be invalidated, right? I think my job is to, like you said, sort of think long-term what we think the outcomes might be. It may very well be that is different enough than the cases we've seen that it would be validated, depending on the court, depending on the day. So I'm not saying it's not allowed. I'm just saying you shouldn't bear all the weight of your decision on whether it would be enforceable.
So with that being said.
Yes.
I guess kind of a related question, Larry's kind of gotten to this, but there are elements of short-term rental regulations that you do feel would stand up in court and he talked about, maybe there's a template we could definitely take a look at. Is that something that we want to, I guess, do we feel like we're close enough with the ADU ordinance kind of elements that we have, where we can keep this moving forward, get this wrapped up, maybe, early summer here, and then address short-term rentals? Or would you like to pause where we are, work on the short-term rental language, and we can, still do a zoning text amendment, kind of keep everything moving together? But do we feel like it's important enough that we want to have that short-term rental language in front of us for discussion sooner rather than later? Or do we want to just wrap this piece up if we are at a point where we can wrap it up?
That's a good question for the village board to direct us on what they want us to work on.
Well, you guys are a recommending body to the board as well, so they're probably gonna wanna know what you guys think.
I guess we could recommend back.
Yeah.
I mean, we
We'll
can
never
say
get it
yeah,
done,
but they should
yeah.
probably direct us to do that, and there's gonna be some cost to have Larry work on it, so the board has to,
It's not a
you know,
bad idea.
make that decision, but
Yeah,
If you're looking, my personal opinion is I don't think that you can have one function without the other. I think that for it to really be cohesive, you have to have them both work in tandem. So, yeah, I guess I would recommend that we pass it to the village board to give us direction on.
Wow. That would work for me.
Well,
What do you think, Phil?
I think we're gonna punt it right back down here saying
yeah.
we don't know
I think,
what
I
we're
think if
doing.
it's something you guys wanna work on, we should just work on it. I
Yeah.
think the board's
Yeah.
gonna be supportive of
I
what you guys
suppose,
think is
yeah.
necessary.
What I wanted to do is have an attorney just tell me what the heck to do. That's what I wanted to do.
Well, that's what
And then
we'll
make him,
work on,
then
yeah.
make
Well-
that attorney responsible.
Let's look at this. I think we have two things at hand, perhaps three, because Scott brought up another point. But
Yeah.
one was owner occupancy, right?
Yep.
And the other is short-term rentals. And Larry is telling us that we can write in anything we want. Some may be found invalid later.
Yeah.
Larry may tell us some of these things are invalid on their face. So I think we should say, I think John has verbalized some of the things that he would like to see. And Larry's response has been, that's fine, but it may not stand up,
And it may, but it may.
but it may.
I mean, well,
And so maybe we should incorporate language with what we can agree on. Send it back to Larry and Elise, and they can say, this will probably fly, or
okay,
that's
a good idea. Give me a little clarification again on the short-term rental. What does that really do for us? What is the, and I'm not
So-
maybe following it properly.
So to many of the concerns that John brought up, I think that the idea is that the shorter term that someone rents, the more likely it is that they're not going to be sort of bought into being a good neighbor. And that's not always true, but that's sort of the way people look at these things over, in communities around the state where they're having problems. So if you have somebody who signs a 1-year lease to rent the mother-in-law suite, after the mother-in-law gets tired of living next to you or whatever happens, that person is sort of invested in being able to stay there for a year, not being evicted, having good neighbor relations, as opposed to someone who, the idea is maybe just there with some friends for the weekend, maybe it's gonna be more recreational, outside fire pits, whatever, just not going about daily life, right? And so I'm not saying that that's necessarily true. I think all different kinds of people use these. But if you regulate short-term rentals through an STR, short-term rental
Okay.
STR ordinance, you can limit how much, how often, what portion of the year. There's specific things in the statute that you're allowed to do that at least make it so that it's not gonna be every weekend or every week for an entire year. And that maybe makes it more attractive to someone to do a longer term lease, and to have someone who's an actual resident rather than a visitor. So that's the value of a short-term rental ordinance, is that it lets you know where they are, who's running them. They have to get what's called a tourist rooming house license from the Department of Ag. There's the potential to require some inspections to a reasonable level, that it's something that's safe for someone to be renting, like almost as a hotel room.
Okay.
So there's some value there. And I guess the idea is that if you know that's what it is and that's what you can manage it in a way that maybe minimizes some of the neighbor conflict.
So maybe if I'm, again, trying to follow this, engineers don't do that good. So I'm looking at this differently as a short term. So you're saying you're regulating the short term rental agreements. And to a certain extent, they kind of favor you to, or not favor you, they kind of incentivize you to maybe make a longer term.
That's not the purpose of it, but.
No, but
If you could only rent that property for a max of 180 days, then what do you do with it? You know, it's hard to find maybe a 6-month long-term rental
by doing
versus
this,
a 12-month.
again, the short term rental, what are you doing with that? Are you limiting it only short term? Or what are you doing with the
Well,
short
they
term?
can still use the unit for whatever they want to use it for.
Okay.
I mean, they can live there themselves. Some people rent out their own home. That's the whole
Sure,
thing that was just
sure.
invalidated, the requirement to do so. But they could have guests stay there that aren't renting, but they could only rent it out for however many days the village allows it, no less than 180. So you can't push it below 180. That's the cutoff. But the rest of the time, they could use it as their painting studio or let guests stay there. But
So you make it, I'm sorry,
You can only
again, I'm
rent
looking at it, so you're saying it, you can't have it for us. You're limiting the short term.
how many days a year is an example.
Right.
And so no building is either a short-term rental or a long, it just depends on what you're using it for on that day.
Okay.
So I guess the biggest advantage that my clients say they get from the short-term rental ordinance is that they get their hands on what's going on where in the community. People have to come in and get an approval. There's certain requirements for reporting and how many days. It also adds to the room tax. Once you have, that should be doing that anyway, but you can kind of keep an eye on that. And that one of the things is that maybe it's more attractive to do long-term rental, but also it's gonna be empty, or at least not rented to somebody who's just off the website half the year, which to the neighbors, if you're talking about sitting in your backyard, if there was one that was a problem, you don't have to deal with it all the time.
Okay. So your thought of working on this some more.
Well, I think on the short-term rentals, it sounds like we could go ahead and use what Larry's suggesting here, and at least as a starting point, have him bring that back and we look at that. And then the other is the owner-occupied element
Right. Right.
and what we want to do with that.
Which is what I thought originally, that one of the reasons why this was brought before the plan commission or the village was because we're looking at essentially what would be an owner occupied.
For at least one of the units, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, yes, excuse me, just for,
Yes,
yes,
right,
one, yeah.
Yeah.
I never thought about being the accessory, but it could be either building.
Yeah.
But yeah,
The other advantage to a short-term rental ordinance is the statute is a little bit wonky in terms of how it's created. But what it starts by saying is you may not restrict the rental of a building, of a residential unit for 7 days or longer. And then it says, but if it's between 29, less than 30 and more than 6, you can limit it, which means that you can completely eliminate rentals for less than 7 days. And most communities that have an STR ordinance do that, so that at the very least, if somebody's coming in and they want it for 2 nights, they can only rent to one person on 2 nights for that 7-day period. And it isn't limited to 180 days per year. It's limited to, tell us when you're gonna do the first one, 180 days later, you're done. So during that period, there might be a whole lot of days that there wasn't someone there. So there's ways you can do it to kind of limit how many nights that they'd be used for this kind of purpose. And so
But essentially, that's the Airbnb ordinance, right?
Yep, that's the
It's-
Airbnb ordinance.
But I mean, the 7 days fits, you're trying to cut down on the Airbnb rentals, right?
Well, you completely cut Airbnb rentals, but only for a week, for 7 days or more.
Right.
Because you can, with that ordinance, you can prohibit rentals for less than 7 days.
Yes.
So that gets to a big part of some of the things Greg brought up too.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now I'm getting a hang of it,
Right.
yes.
Two questions, if I could, please. One thing that we're trying to do with this ADU is to minimize some of the costs. Because we were doing away with park fees and some of the other stuff that's been structured. If we go this route that we're suggesting right now, you said that there's some inspections and things like that that have to happen as part of that? So I'm assuming.
For short-term rentals.
Not have to, but you can certainly.
Okay,
I mean, there's, the Department of Ag side, they do that, that wouldn't be the village's involvement, other than I would typically in an ordinance have them at least supply the village with a copy of that license, the tourist rooming house license, but we wouldn't impose more cost as a result of that.
and the second thing is hypothetically, in this situation, if we call it a mother-in-law suite and I rent it to my mother-in-law, if I charge my mother-in-law rent, I kinda like my wife and things would get prickly in my house. So can I rent to a mother-in-law hypothetically free?
Yeah, so that you can see where the question of whether you're renting or not gets very hard to enforce, because, I mean, I know of all kinds of places where, up in northern Wisconsin, where, you know, it's somebody's friend, and you're
Your
paying
guest.
them $1,000 for the weekend, but it's only through word of mouth, and nobody's paying taxes, that you're just paying them to stay at their place. So, there's an enforceability issue with respect to any kind of restrictions on. That's why the short-term rental ordinances are so developed, because you actually have to get a license, you have to get licensed by, and if they're doing that sort of under the table, you'll never know. But if they're using a site like VRBO, or, you know, if somebody finds one and it's uplisted, you know, there's also the question of whether and who's gonna enforce, who are the village staff that are gonna do that work, but yeah, there's a whole thing you build out to try to regulate short-term, even just figuring out where they're being rented, right? But as soon as you get, what ends up happening is somebody will be upset with the person who described the place that they come from Nevada to stay in, and they go and they say, well, I'm gonna call the Village of Oregon and say, you know, this place isn't safe for whatever reason, there were no fire extinguishers, and then you go, oh, well, we didn't know they were a rental, and they're supposed to have a license, and then you go and enforce. So it's, all of the enforcement side of this is, first of all, it takes staff time, but it's also really hard to pin down.
Well, I think that, and I might add, that goes to John's point earlier, and that is we're trying to stop the thief will stop at a wall. So I can tell you right now, we're not gonna hire staff to try, and I think you all know that. But when we have a complaint or an issue, you have something in place to say, these are the rules,
And it's also, to John's point, you know, a lot of ordinances aren't written because somebody's gonna be looking over your shoulder to make sure you do it every time. But if you prohibit short-term rentals below 7 days, period, and somebody rents for 2 days and you find out about it, that's an ordinance violation, and they get cited just like anyone else, right?
Yeah,
29 to 7 is that gray area. Over 30, you can't impose restrictions. I'll say, since it looks like it's possible that you'll include this kind of residency requirement, there is an argument that you can, and I haven't got into the arguments either way, but the argument is that requiring someone to live in that house doesn't mean you're requiring them to live in the one you're renting. I'd love to see that, or I'd love to have to make that argument and see where it would go, but there is, to be clear, there is a logical argument that you could impose this. Just don't assume it's going to be there
Right.
in the end.
right, so I think we have something to work with on the
Yeah,
short-term
we're
part,
getting there, yeah.
everybody.
Yep.
So now how about on the owner occupied? Where are we on that? One of the units?
Go ahead. I got a sense you were gonna say something. Go ahead.
I feel pretty strongly with John that owner occupancy is key to this. I don't care which unit it is, but the fact that they're on site, that it doesn't become two rental properties, you know. I would not be happy if suddenly my next door neighbor,
Sure.
you know, decided to build another structure and leave and, you know,
Right.
let it be rentals.
So can you write something to that effect? Or-
I'll follow that up with a question.
Please.
So, what Elise said before is that the easiest thing to do would be to allow these in places where you think 2 units on the same lot is acceptable. So in areas where you would allow, let's say, a duplex, so it's 2 units separated versus 2 units together. If you build a duplex, there's nothing keeping you from renting both sides.
Right.
And in fact, I think you'd be precluded from doing that, right? So it isn't necessary, so you have two ways to approach this. One is to look at that list of zones that's in the memo and determine maybe a lesser group of zones that you'd want to allow this, kinds of places where you would normally have multiple units on the same lot. Or allow it in all those zones and impose a residency requirement for at least one of the structures. And then figure out, as Patrick was saying before, figure out a way to define residency and give direction to staff as to how over time you're supposed to keep track of whether someone's living there or not.
Do you have experience with other communities on this particular issue?
I haven't written an ordinance that has a residency requirement.
Have not.
There are ordinances out there, and certainly we've come across some of those, but
I still think owner
which
occupied.
way? Residency requirement or less zones? Cut off that permit by right and put it in the zones where you would be happy with a duplex.
Well, there's already a duplex on all the duplex lots.
Yeah.
So now you're adding a third unit to a
Well-
duplex lot potentially, or, you know, and there are certainly areas on single-family lots where there's room
I
for
think-
this and it could be done nicely.
I think we did talk, that is actually addressed somewhere, cause I asked the same question, like, why would they be in MR8? We wouldn't want this like behind an apartment building or something,
Yeah.
and I think, maybe it's not on this table, but in the language, that it would only be allowed on a property where there is,
Already a building?
just a single-family home.
There's already.
So, cause there are single-family homes in TR6, like North Main Street, for example. A lot of that is TR6, but there are single-family homes.
And that's what I,
So let me see if I can.
That makes sense
Fine.
because.
yeah, you would, if there's a maximum number of units.
Yeah.
And if they've already got that maximum number, you don't build another one.
Right.
So in other words, there's 2 ways you can do this, and I think the easier, well, it may be worth thinking about doing it in more of a limited area where you'd be comfortable with multiple. Like if somebody, the house burned down, they could build a duplex there. Maybe that's the place to start at least.
Yeah.
And then you don't have to worry
Here's-
about.
Yeah, here's the language. This is part of what is recommended to be replaced. So an ADU may be located within or attached to a principal single-family dwelling. So that's what we currently have, that attached in-law suite type thing. Or located within a detached accessory building on the same lot as a single-family dwelling. So it's not saying which district that's in. We have that in a separate section where it's allowable, but if there was already a duplex or a fourplex or something on an MR8 lot, that would not be allowed to have an ADU on it.
And if someone was not in one of these zones and they wanted to build a second dwelling unit, and there's a single-family residence there now, they could come to the village board through your recommendation for a rezone to get into a zoning district that would allow it. And at that point, because it's a request for a legislative decision, you may impose in specific situations some sort of a condition of rezone to at least put up the stop sign as you're talking about, and try to impose some restriction. But it may very well be, they come to you and it's a corner lot and they're telling you, we'll build it right here and there's a good, there's not obstructing anyone's view, it's not next to anyone's deck, and you might say, that's an appropriate place to rezone for this. I think from an administration standpoint, it would be easier to pick the zones that you're comfortable with no residency requirement than it is to impose a residency requirement in all of the zones.
Enforceability.
So according to that verbiage, you could not ever have more than 2 residences, an ADU and a single family on any lot. Is that my understanding? So they
Right,
couldn't come
unless
in
it's
with a duplex and then put an ADU on it.
Correct.
every
Yep, these would only be allowed to be added where there are single
Where
family
there's a
homes.
single family home.
What if it's too flat and they have an apartment upstairs already? Can they build an ADU in the backyard and they
I
essentially
think
have
that would be
3
considered,
units on that
no, I
lot?
think that'd be considered a duplex, 2 dwelling
Right.
units are already there
They
on
could
site.
eliminate the, they could
They could
combine the
convert
house
it.
into one and then build one, right?
Yeah,
Right.
there you go.
People
But
will
they
get
also-
creative with it.
they will,
believe
they
me.
will,
yeah. I mean, I guess I don't really see that scenario you were mentioning that somebody would come for a rezone, because this is all of the residential
I'm
districts,
saying
so.
if we pulled some of those off.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you could look at it more on a case-by-case basis. The other thing I wanted to address was, John, you were talking a little bit ago about the cost burden with the short-term rentals and the inspections and stuff. I mean, in my mind, we don't wanna have that cost burden on the people who are doing this, for the family and things like that. So if their intent is not to do the short-term rental at this time, they wouldn't have to deal with it's not like, just because you have an ADU, you have to get it certified as a short-term
No.
rental. If you chose, no, I'm just gonna do this for my family or guests or my artist studio in the back, you wouldn't have to do those inspections and things like that. So that wouldn't apply to necessarily every ADU.
No, it wouldn't, definitely not.
It would apply to the single-family homes and apartments and other things that are already being rented
Right.
here in
And to
village,
John's
so.
previous point about looking forward, what we have to think about is, I live here now, I've got this intent, but I'm not gonna live here forever. And so then if there's some sort of a deed restriction or, how do you, I suppose, you'd sell it as something that you could never buy it to rent it out, the whole property, right? Because it's some sort of a I think it gets complicated when you start talking about, to me, it might be cleanest for administration to figure out which zones you are comfortable with multiple units and maybe make some zoning changes as it relates to that too, zoning map amendments as it relates to that. But if we're gonna include every residential zone and a residency requirement, between the risk of invalidating that residency requirement, and at least 2 of you have said that's key to doing this, and then the administrative challenges associated with that, it might be worth trying to figure out if you could say, these are the zones, looking at the map, where we'd be comfortable with it without the residency requirement, and if somebody wants to do it somewhere else, they've gotta come and get rezoned to one of those permissible areas.
Right, but
Or
then we'd
just
probably end up
spot
with spot
zoning,
zoning,
yeah.
right,
Which is
with a
okay.
TR6.
Yeah, that's okay.
Another item that you brought up was, will we see this potentially used with some older homes that aren't in the greatest of shape being demolished and creating a new duplex lot, kind of in a backdoor fashion, through this. We hadn't really considered that. The thought is that somebody just builds this quaint little structure in the side yard or the backyard, but it could be used to just redevelop the entire site,
So you have to decide, is that inherently a bad thing? I mean, somebody could do that now, right? Build a modern
Not
house in the
necessarily, I
middle
mean,
of the
it
older
has
neighborhood.
some bright spots, but for the neighbors that, thought they were living, next to a single-family home, now find themselves next door to a duplex, they're not gonna be very happy, they're gonna be pounding on your door.
So my question is, could you not just create a unique zoning identity for this, and whoever wants to do it has to come in and ask for a rezone? And then you can have those restrictions to that specific,
Kind of maybe like a conditional use permit type
I-
structure.
something,
That's-
yeah.
It'd be
This-
better to do it as a separate zoning district, because then it's a legislative decision, because we're so restricted on what we can impose for conditions.
That's
on
true,
conditional
right,
uses.
conditional use permits
Then you
really.
handle it on a case-by-case basis, and then it's a little more work, I guess, but at least you can say this is an appropriate use of, you know, this plot versus, you know, trying to be generic for the whole village.
Well, you could do location on the lot, size, characteristics.
But those are all what we already have
Right.
here in this, I mean, we could use this
Right.
framework, but I guess, yeah, I'm just curious, like, what do you think would be the test? Say, oh, this is appropriate here, but not appropriate here, or maybe it's appropriate, this is gonna be your mother-in-law, whatever. You sell the property in 2 years, all of a sudden that situation that you thought was happening on that property has changed.
Right.
Now, is it no longer appropriate, any of these restrictions, they're gonna be tied to the land, they're not tied to that owner. So if the ownership changes, like just with the conditional use permit, it's tied to the property.
Can that use be tied to the owner?
No.
Conditional uses can't, and zoning can't.
The only thing that could be tied to the owner would be maybe something like what we have here in italics. This
I think that would run with the land. too.
restricted, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of everything we do, right, is if it's appropriate for one person to operate,
Yeah.
whatever, ice cream stand here, it shouldn't matter who runs it as long as they're operating it the same hours and,
You
you
could
know, all that
sunset
stuff.
certain things or whatever, but.
Right, you can't say
but
you
it's
can
gonna
do
run
this,
with the land.
but no,
Yeah.
this other guy can't, yeah.
I think we're getting, just at a side note, we're getting back to the reason, what Larry's statement earlier was, he has no communities with owner occupied, restrictions.
I don't have any, but I do know of
They
many.
exist,
Right,
he
yeah,
said,
yeah,
yeah.
right.
We know of many, I just haven't done it myself.
Right,
Right.
but they could be
I think
challenged,
the city of
it just
Madison-
hasn't
yeah.
happened yet, so it's being challenged in other non-ADU arenas, right, other housing parts of the statute, so. We've been about this about an hour, so I just
Yes.
wanna check in with you guys, you know, we don't have to make any decisions today, if you wanna think about this a little bit, we can have Larry maybe come back in May, or if you want us to move forward with some language drafting, we can work on that, in the
I
meantime.
think we
so.
certainly want to have some language to
Yeah.
move forward on part of this.
Yeah.
And I think there's some things that we still all have questions on that we need clarification and,
But we keep on getting in the what ifs and all kind of weeds, and I agree with you 100% that some language gets us in a direction, hopefully. Does that make sense?
Maybe we could do two options, limit the list,
Mhm.
no requirement, and then we could do the requirement is easy because it just is
Sure,
gonna be.
and sort of like pros and cons, we can
Yeah.
kind of talk through of each, and then
Yeah.
the short-term rental, sounds like you already have kind of a template, we can
Yeah,
look at
Certainly
that
at least
too,
something to
whether it's May or June, we can bring that back for discussion. Okay,
Phil,
let us
you
take a whack at it, I think we have a good sense of the varied perspectives here, so.
it'd be good for me if anybody has any more strong thoughts on this issue of, occupancy, owner occupancy. Speak.
Now, or
I'll-
send
I'll
me an
just share
email.
One question I had reading it, and it's, the number of occupants in an ADU shall not exceed one family. And then what I wrote is, what about a live-in caregiver? Does that restrict that?
And we can do language, that more matches the statute. It says, a building or structure that is used or intended to be used as a home, residence, or sleeping place by one person or by two or more persons maintaining a common household. So it doesn't necessarily,
Yeah, I
We
just
can-
see
we can
that
work on language
as a
like-
big scenario, right? Somebody's needs
I think-
care.
in the summary, I think we're talking about, it's not a multi-unit, right? It's a single unit.
Yeah.
But there's all kinds of different scenarios. It could be a friend staying with you, or it's, it's still it's considered to be one residence, right?
One
Yeah.
household,
Two groups that are separated.
okay, good point.
All right, have at it.
All right, to be
Because
continued,
like I said, we spent, it's enough on it. All right, thank you.
thanks, Larry.
We're gonna move on to item 6B for discussion only, which we just had, but Conceptual presentation, development Bergamot Lot 505, 1012 Wingfoot Drive.
Move to deny. Oh,
No.
sorry, too early, Ron?
Do you want me to give a little background? I can introduce Ron here. So I think most folks are probably familiar with this lot, whether you know it as Lot 505 or not, but this lot is about just over 5.5 acres just to the west of the Bergamot tennis court and the pool area. This was one of a couple of higher density areas in the original Bergamot plat, kind of circa 2003-ish, that were shown on the plat for higher density. They were all at 15 dwelling units an acre, what was permitted in that plat. So Lot 505 is the last really fully undeveloped lot of those, but the other ones are the Lavalette condos, those kind of Italian looking condos there at the roundabout at Augusta and Bergamot, the Bergamot townhomes out by Bergamot and CC, and then Legend Hills up just north of the clubhouse. So that was intended for multifamily and then turned into those more narrow lot single family homes. So generally everything has been downzoned over time. I think most recently was probably either Legend Hills or there was, I think most of you were on when the Lavalette condos came in with sort of a kind of like Eagle Drive, a duplex replat. So obviously that hasn't been built yet, but Ron Klaas is here as a representative from the development team with a concept to do single family homes on that parcel, kind of similar to what is nearby at the adjacent cul-de-sac. So I guess I'll turn it over to you and share a little bit about the concept that you've presented tonight.
Thanks, Elise. You have the materials in front of you, so I'll keep it brief. But the goal here is to create single-family homes as part of the Bergamot neighborhood, where they would look and feel the same as everything around them, with a private drive similar to the other roads out here within the gated portion. The private drive, private road that would serve those lots. Access would be off Wingfoot, and the lots would be incorporated into the HOA of Bergamot. So it would become seamless with the neighborhood. That's what we're after. There's gonna be challenges. Access to Wingfoot has to be figured out. It is currently not available to this lot, so we need to work on that. There would have to be things done to incorporate it into the HOA. None of those are village concerns necessarily, but internally, we're working on that. But as Elise mentioned, it would be a change in the comp plan to a lower density here. We met last night with a small group of the immediate neighbors, and I think it's fair to say that they support this. And Jim Purden, president of the HOA, is here if you had questions for him. So the goal tonight is just to get input and feedback so that I know I can take the next step and head in that direction.
Who wants to go first?
I think it's been sitting there for 20 years and
Yeah.
nobody's wanted to pull the trigger on the higher density, and I think this is a reasonable fit if you can make all those, meet all those logistical challenges and figure out how to get access and water and sewer and cluster mailboxes probably, and all of those things. I see it being popular with the immediate neighbors, of course. And we've had apartments in Bergamot before, and that was not real popular.
Ron, is it the intention for these lots then to meet the same covenant restrictions and site design layout requirements of Bergamot itself?
That is correct. All the same covenants and restrictions.
Okay.
Architectural review as well.
Are they intended to be marketed at about the same price point, or are these lots slightly smaller so they'll be at a lower price point, or what is the intention for that?
It would be, I think, in the same general price range. They're not on the course, so they're not in the same range as those. And some of them are deep, so they get bigger, but, and this may not even be the final layout, but, yeah, in the same range. Mhm. As the last phase that went in, off of, 17, 18.
I think it's fine, personally. So, and I would think that all the neighbors would be happy with it also, as opposed to what theoretically could have been there.
Mhm.
I don't like the word intent, you know that.
I do.
Okay,
That's why I use it.
I know.
So,
So
like I s-
we're giving them a nod heads approval.
Yes, and
here?
nod, yes,
Sounds like
nod.
it.
Yes for me, yes for everybody else, so it sounds so great, Ron.
Yep, so as I mentioned in the memo, there would be a comp plan amendment needed for this, and obviously a plat amendment, probably to the Bergamot plat to fill in this, this lot here, so those would all be approval steps coming before you at a later date should this move forward.
Okay.
Thanks, Ron.
Thanks all.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you. Thanks
Thanks
for
for
waiting.
listening to the ADU conversation too for
Would
a
this
little bit there.
fit in with the current comp plan amendment you have moving, or is that already too far along?
No, the Hillcrest one has already been adopted, so yeah, this
Okay,
would
so
be
just
a new
Start that
one.
process again?
Yep. Yeah, but 3 or 4 months.
Thanks a
process.
lot.
All right.
Thanks
guys.
for sitting through the other stuff that was so interesting. Yeah. Move on to 6C, review and possible approval of site plan revision, the cell tower equipment changes on the Village of Oregon Water Tower, 5199 Lincoln Road. Applicant is T-Mobile.
Okay, this is, some, equipment changes for T-Mobile out on our Lincoln Road water tower. This is not expanding the footprint of anything that's on the ground, but switching out some equipment and then, up on the tower itself, some equipment being replaced as well as it is, outdated. The other thing that's kind of in the works here, I mentioned, we're still working with T-Mobile on an updated lease arrangement, just with, it gets updated every few years for inflation and other kind of impacts to our infrastructure here. So that's still being negotiated, and obviously we would want to have that in place before giving official go-ahead on the site plan. But Lauren worked with Strand Engineering, who does this particular kind of review, and I think just minor comments, just some details they wanted to see as some equipment choices were finalized and some final plans, but nothing major, so she felt comfortable with just bringing it before you tonight for discussion. If there's any questions, we might be able to answer it. There's nobody here from T-Mobile that I'm aware of. I know you two, and I don't think you work for T-Mobile, so, but I'll just scroll down to the plans here, but any questions we can answer, otherwise we didn't have any concerns on this
Yeah,
switch
essentially
out.
you're gonna have, it's just newer equipment, basically, is what we're doing.
Move to
And-
approve.
pardon?
Can it be orange? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, it can be orange.
Sorry, just
The
kidding.
water,
Yeah, I
yeah.
know you are.
No, we're not talking about the whole water tower, just
No.
a little bit, so.
And move to approve. Or recommend approval.
Recommend approval? Yeah, we got recommend approval. Yes, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. Okay, item 6D, for information only, Oregon Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan Request for Proposals, RFP.
All right, so this was actually just published today. There were some minor changes made, but just to refresh everybody's memory, back in 2022, Lauren helped me apply for a TAP grant, Transportation Alternative Program grant through the DOT for a bike and pedestrian study. So we have until 2029 to spend those funds, but the project does need to be started by this summer, and finally have a small moment to breathe. So finally got the RFP together. There's a T who is responsible for the TAP grant. So he's reviewed the RFP, given it the thumbs up, gave us some templates to work from and all of that. So it is a 80-20 split, so village is only responsible for 20% of the costs. Estimated project cost about 70,000 or less. So RFP, like I said, was posted today. It's posted on the Wisconsin League of Municipalities, the American Planning Association Wisconsin chapter page, and on our website too. So the proposals are due May 1st, and then I think we're gonna have review and then interviews on May 14th. So if anybody is interested in helping a small team of staff review the RFPs that may come back, please let me know and we can coordinate schedules and if we need to do the interviews and things, making sure that works for everybody. So this is more just for information, but I do have the planning commission kind of more or less, running some similar like the downtown plan. You guys more or less kind of looking at the drafts and approving and making a recommendation to the board, but this will largely be a planning commission type plan. So it's looking at what we currently have, where are there gaps, where are there improvements that could be made, and then creating a plan for us that we can work into our CIP for projects. So hope that this will be done by next April or so, if not sooner, and then we can use that in our CIP planning process next summer for projects for the next decade or so.
Good, thank you. Any other new business? We're gonna move on then to communication miscellaneous business, status of public and private development projects.
All right, so quite a list as always. I'll try to make it relatively brief. 2 well projects still under construction, still nearing completion. Individual issues came up on each of them within about the past week. For well 3, the one out on Hillcrest, I think we're past it at this point. And we're looking, it is currently being disinfected, so we're looking at getting our safe samples out of the reservoir next week and hopefully commissioning by the end of next week if all goes well. Well 6, some coordination issues with Alliant, but I think we have a path forward on that. Looking at startup that 3rd full week of April, everything else is pretty much in place there. We did have some pretty robust SCADA upgrades for our water system. That's now been finished. Those were all kind of put into place at the end of March, early April here, and we're good to go on that. Wastewater treatment plant project on schedule, still going. Change order came to the board for some site changes on the 6th. Nothing, not a real big surprise, pretty standard stuff. The change orders are well within contingency, so no big concerns there. North Oak Street, that one is finally substantially complete. So we have gotten some comments from residents, some areas of restoration that didn't fully take, pretty standard. We will have Fisher come back out probably in May once we have consistently good weather and just have them clean that up. But really pretty much done there. For 2026 projects, not a huge amount of changes from last month. Alpine and CC still scheduled to begin in late May and early June with an end date of August 31st. Contractor on that is Rock Road Companies, and on-site engineer is going to be KL. You've probably noticed a lot of work being done out in that right of way. That is Alliant. They're doing gas and electric upgrades ahead of that project, working with Dane County in that right of way since it is theirs, and us now as they move up towards Alpine. So hopefully getting out of the way before Rock Road comes in and starts our project. We do have a village project website for that, and I know Public Works Committee is going to work this month on starting to publicize a detour plan for that, since that will be a significant change in a lot of people's traffic patterns. East Lincoln Street, between North Main and North Perry, that's our other major street reconstruction project this year. That is going to begin on or after the last day of the school year this year per the contract, hopefully completing in September or October. We're very, very aware, as is the school, of the limitations and access to Prairie View and Netherwood. We've been in pretty close contact with them, very aware of how that's going to have to be phased to maintain that access in there, as well as being cognizant of Lincoln Street's importance to the high school. So that will be led by WSDOT. We'll have quite the team out there. We've got JT Engineering doing administration on that, construction inspection by Core, and then we have hired Town and Country Engineering to do inspection of the village-funded utilities, the water and sewer out there. Contractor on that is James Peterson Sons. They're out of the west side of the state. Little Street project, Park and Waterman Street, probably is going to look like an offshoot of the Senior Center project, but it is its own project. That one is done by Speedway Sand and Gravel, inspected by Town and Country. That's likely to start up here in May. Yeah, probably May, and finish up by mid-June per contract. That's likely going to be about 3 weeks of work that you see out there. And then that one should be wrapped up. Speaking of the Senior Center, which is being done by Portson, they have the construction fencing up, I'm sure, as is pretty obvious. They are still waiting. It sounds like there were some discrepancies between the structural plans and the architectural drawings, so they've been hashing that out. Per the PM at Portson, it sounds like that is being finished up tonight or tomorrow. And at that point, they're looking to hit foundation work pretty hard. So hopefully gonna start seeing some mobilization and some heavy equipment out there. That is good progress. Gary Dish Park on our southeast side in the Autumn Ridge, Phase 2 neighborhood. That is being performed by Speedway Sand and Gravel and overseen by Rutler, which did the design for that. That we have a pre-con scheduled for next Friday. It's looking like it's going to begin in May or early June and probably finished up by August or September. Kind of has to be given the amount of grass out there. So doesn't look too complicated to them, so hopefully we'll be pretty straightforward. Last in construction projects this year, the Public Works garage roof replacement, probably not a project any of you guys were aware of or would have been aware of if I didn't mention it in this meeting. It's probably going to be about a week or two of work being done on the Public Works garage. That's going to be done by Advanced Building Corporation and fit in essentially in the next couple of months around garage door replacement. So just some work being done out there that, again, hopefully not too noticeable or we're not doing our jobs right. Couple design projects just to keep you guys in the loop on them. County MM Wolf Street Phase 1, so Janesville Street all the way down through Pleasant Oak. That project is moving ahead with the roundabout option. It is currently at about 60% design completion, and we're still targeting a bid date of this fall, so November, December time period, with construction happening in 2027. A reminder that that is a joint county and village project, but the village is the lead on this project, and we will be going out to bid by private contractor, unlike past jurisdictional transfer projects. We are working through some real estate acquisition, probably most notably with the school district right now. That's been pretty friendly so far. Hopefully it continues. Bethel Greenacre Park Improvement Project scheduled for construction in 2027. Planning and design is being done by JT Engineering. We've completed the major stakeholder outreach there, and they're working on concept plans. So we're looking at a public informational meeting for those concept drawings in mid-May. That'll be going on the May calendar when that comes out. To Jenny's point, next year we also have water tower painting and rehab for the South Standpipe and the Lincoln Road towers. So it's actually interesting timing with what T-Mobile is working on. We are going to be looking at doing what we did for the North Standpipe at both of those and giving them kind of a refresher to keep them in good condition. So we have not gotten to colors yet, but requests are welcome. Strand is working on that for us as they did on the North Standpipe. They did a great job on that. So we're optimistic that that's going to be a good project. Lastly, we have the kind of water system master plan / new water tower and interzonal booster station planning siting effort. So we have been having Town and Country work on an update to our water system master plan. Kind of chief among the goals of that is to identify where a new water tower and a new pump station are going to go for construction right around 2028. So they've been working on that in the background, kind of trying to assess if these things are needed, how big they should be, and where they should be going. And they do have some preliminary conclusions. So Those will likely go to the Public Works Committee meeting here at the end of April or possibly in May so that we can meet our CIP schedule. But some more information on those kind of major facilities projects for the water utility will be coming here in pretty short order. Just to wrap it up, private development, Greenview Preserve Phase 4, they're on top of things. DNR is reviewing all of their plans. We have already approved them on our side. They're looking to start construction in May or June. Highlands of Netherwood Phase 4, a bit of drama there, but that will be completed in 2026 per the developers agreement. And we are working with them as well as with our internal legal counsel to make sure that happens. Highlands of Netherwood Phase 5, FDG and Lennar have both indicated they're interested in wrapping up the Highlands of Netherwood development with that Phase 5 bit, but we have not seen anything formal, and we don't really have a great handle on where things are with that project. So with that, I'm finally finished. Thanks for
All
sticking
right,
with us.
thank you. That was, yeah, as well, long-winded. Okay. Moving on then to upcoming Plan Commission meeting dates, which is May 7th. That's a joint meeting with the village board, correct?
Correct.
And we're going to discuss the former Village Hall, Spring Street. That was good.
And adjacent environs, yeah, redevelopment.
Okay, and the next one will be Thursday, Thursday, June 4th.
Yeah, probably in
Okay,
light of
right,
the
yeah.
joint meeting, I'll probably have Larry come back, I think in June, so we don't make
Yeah,
the May meeting
yeah,
too
I don't-
heavy.
I think we're gonna, yeah, that'd be smart.
Okay,
Unless the village board wants to sit and wait, because we'll put that on the agenda first, right, Larry?
yeah. We'll make
guess
it
not.
for that.
Okay, planning staff meeting agenda, you can all see it. Without objection, meeting is adjourned. I love that.